Thank you. I wanted to ask you about using what you're just saying now. Having spent months at True North Health Center with Alan Goldhammer and watched people fasting for 20, 30, 40 days and then being refed, what makes it different? Because he just uses plants. Why would you say that the children in Africa who have distended stomachs would need protein from animals? They did very gentle refeeding, very slow refeeding at True North. If they did it too fast, people seemed to, when they took it on themselves to go faster, it didn't work for them. So why would we start to give animals to?
It's an interesting juxtaposition you're making. So I hope you could all hear the question, but it had to do with fasting and refeeding. And we're in a population that we do suffer nutrient deficiencies. The typical American diet, although it's a sea of excess, there are islands of deficiency even so, but still we're awash in excess, and people willfully fast to try and control that excess. And everything related to refeeding in that context is very different than when you're facing a protracted period of malnutrition at critical times related to psychological milestones, where the ramifications are long-term cognitive impairment. Now, even then, I don't disagree with you. Again, I was making a point that if we are going to successfully feed 8 to 10 billion people, and we need to look at the most efficient way to produce all the nutrients that everybody needs, including the many millions who aren't getting critical nutrients that they need right now, there may be an argument for mixed diet in some cases. That doesn't mean we couldn't do it with plant exclusivity. It's just, it hasn't been established yet. It's not clear. The specific nutrients that are missing from those diets are highly concentrated in animal foods. And if that proved to be the most efficient way to help children avoid lifelong cognitive impairment, I think that's probably, again, remember that the Eat Lancet report argues for a 90% reduction in global meat consumption. Let's you and me eat plant exclusive and leave that little bit of room for those situations where people are facing overt nutrient deficiency, right? Okay, and then pass the microphone around. We'll try to be egalitarian here. So the secondary question is, are the toxins concentrated? Yes, of course. Now, sadly, folks, you can't avoid toxins on this planet. We've mucked it up pretty badly. You want a toxin-free existence, you have to find another planet to call your own. That's just the sad reality. And there's really nothing you can do that's a perfect defense. You can eat organic, but the inorganic stuff is in the field next door, and it flows in the water, and it's in the air. I mean, unfortunately so. And yes, animals bioconcentrate any toxins to which they're exposed. So there are toxins in the plants, they're in the soil, they're in the air, they're in the water, they get into the plants, but they're dilute in the plants. If we eat animals that have eaten the plants, those toxins tend to be retained and concentrated. If you eat animals that have eaten other animals, that have eaten other animals that have eaten plants, the process is repeated in each step up the food chain. So for example, if you're concerned about heavy metal, we all have heard, right? You have to be careful about swordfish and tuna. These are large predatory fish that eat other fish, that eat other fish, that eat the small plankton and algae, where these toxins exist, but are most dilute, so they do get concentrated, right? But again, I think we have to be careful not to mix all these different issues together. I'm a public health physician. You tell me that there's a population where children are facing the prospect of lifelong cognitive impairment because of overt malnutrition. My question is, okay, what can we do to fix that? And then, honestly, in medicine, so just a very quick digression, I've had patients over the years in the ICU where we put in an intra-aortic balloon pump. That's their heart is not working effectively as a pump. They're dying. We put this massive tube into their aorta with a balloon that inflates to support their heart. Now, would anybody who is functioning even vaguely consider having a massive catheter put into your aorta with a balloon to help your heart? Absolutely not. But if the only option you have other than that is to die within 24 hours, you say, okay, that sounds pretty toxic, but the alternative's worse, right? So anytime we discuss toxins, They're important, but just like with diet, I think the critical question is compared to what? Compared to lifelong cognitive impairment, stunting, or potentially dying of malnutrition before you reach your 5th birthday, okay, fine. We're willing to risk it.
Thank you so much for your work. 2 quick comments, and 1 question. First comment was that when you mentioned wild salmon, well, let me get to that next. My first comment is I've been a meditator for 40 years, twice a day, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is a higher power, and that power will help you if you ask for help. And there's no scientific evidence that I know of that it exists, but experientially and from so many other people I know who are meditators, it exists. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and make that real. And thank you.
What I can say is I completely respect your conviction. Where, if I may respectfully append a caution, there are people who practice different versions of spirituality who have an absolute conviction that their version of it is right. And that creates exclusivities. And the simple fact is, if one of them is right, all the others are wrong. And yet they have the exact same level of conviction. So that there is something that we can all share. I say I'm happy to step down, link arms, and sing Kumbaya with you. I just want to be careful about anything that leads to the excuse to create us and them. We're all us.
Yeah. I concur. So,
and then somehow we're going from God to wild salmon. So go ahead. You make that pivot now.
Yeah. So I've been a plant-based vegan for as long as I've been meditating. I started meditating. I looked at a piece of meat in my broiler, and I was like, oh my God, that's like an animal, So I became a vegan, and I recently found out that I was diagnosed with osteoporosis, which really scared me. I don't get much protein in my diet. And, when I go to Hippocrates, they say no more than 28 grams of protein or you're going to cause problems to yourself. I go on the internet, it says, women of a certain age should increase their protein and at least 50 grams of protein a day. So I last week went and bought a piece of wild salmon. But my concern, not only for the environment, but also Dr. Greger said that they found in women who had breast reductions, the tissue in these women had the toxins from the ocean. So can you make give us some kind of piece about protein and being vegan?
All right, well, thank you for sharing. So the first point I would make is that the remedy for osteoporosis is not going to be more protein anyway. If you are suffering from sarcopenia, which is a decline in your muscle mass, that could conceivably be related to protein, and there are convincing studies showing that as we age, we're more prone to sarcopenia. I've worked out every day of my life for over 40 years, but I find that at 57, I put muscle on more slowly, it comes off faster. It's just a fact. And I have not made any adjustment in my diet as a result. I just try to maintain the same vigorous level of activity. I think in terms of muscle, the single best thing you can do is exercise. And then provide adequate protein, and it's very unlikely you're not getting sufficient protein. There are some studies suggesting that older people, and I don't think you're in that group, we're talking about people who are sort of homebound, restricted diets, limited physical activity. Muscle starts to fall off them, and slightly higher intake of protein may slow the muscle loss. There's very little to suggest that increasing protein intake will confer benefit on bone density, and rather a lot of research to suggest the opposite. If you think about it, protein is made up of amino acids. Acids are obviously acidic, And when you increase your intake of acidic foods, it needs to be buffered because the pH of the blood is kept constant. There are a number of buffering mechanisms, but one of them is to release something called hydroxyapatite, which is the mineral matrix of bone, because that's alkaline, buffers acid. And along with the rest of that matrix comes calcium, which is apt to spill out in your urine or pass out through the intestines. So higher intake of protein is not the answer. We could talk offline about some of the things that are likely to be helpful in ameliorating osteoporosis. It's actually not terribly convincing that diet alone per se will make the difference. Weight-bearing exercise, there are some specific treatments, medicinal. And by the way, that's another thing. I do worry at times that in our shared passion for lifestyle as medicine, we forget that sometimes medicine is good medicine. If I may, I'll digress from the wild salmon. So again, if you want to eat wild salmon, okay, but I don't think it's going to help your bones. So it would have to be for some other reason. It is a potential source of vitamin D, but you can get that easily as a supplement. And by the way, vitamin D ought to come from sunlight anyway. Interestingly, vitamin D we think of as a nutrient. Actually, it's a hormone. The only reason we need to think of it as a nutrient is we're not out in the sun nearly enough. So the issue of nutrients and diet as medicine versus medicine as medicine, I don't think we have to make an either-or choice. And the best anecdote I can give you to justify my position, first of all, I was an internist and prescribed many drugs to people, even though I always favored lifestyle. I didn't have a lifestyle remedy that worked as well as an antibiotic, for example. But the best anecdote I've got is my own. I was supposed to give a keynote address at Harvard at a lifestyle medicine conference. And I came down with anaplasmosis. It's a tick-borne illness. Never felt so sick in my life. Thought I was going to die. Couldn't turn my eyes. I'm exposed to ticks. I've got dogs. I've got a horse. I'm out in the woods all the time. I can't avoid some exposure to ticks. Got anaplasmosis. So I wound up giving my talk at Harvard from a hospital bed in Connecticut via Skype. And I said, I can't give the talk I was about to give. I was going to be all about lifestyle medicine's the best. I'm going to say that even if you do everything right, stuff can go wrong. And thank goodness we have medicine, because right now they're infusing an antibiotic into me and I feel a lot better than I did yesterday, or I couldn't be giving this talk at all. We can have both. We are beneficiaries of a 21st century pharmacopoeia, 21st century technology. We don't have to renounce that. You've got some options for your osteoporosis.
Hello, Dr. Katz, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Hi.
How are you?
Great, thank you so much. I wanted to ask a question regarding your thoughts of this sort of evidence-based nutrition approach and how it ties to the food as medicine kind of topic, where the evidence-based nutrition is very pragmatic in its approach, where you have to take into account the needs of the individual, the research that's been done, and kind of tie that to what you as a human being have experienced, and how that applies to the wellness and the health of eating, not necessarily clean, but natural food.
I don't see any major distinction between evidence-based nutrition and food as medicine. I think the reason that we have been able to advance the proposition of food as medicine and lifestyle as medicine as effectively as we have, and the lifestyle medicine movement, by the way, is growing massively. The American College of Lifestyle Medicine is the only medical college I'm aware of in the United States that doubles its membership year by year, year after year. It's spawning sister organizations around the world. It's a movement. It's a movement whose time has come, and the reason it's a movement is because the evidence is on our side. There is no pill. I think Pam did a really lovely job with this last night. I've often used this example myself. Imagine if there were a new pill, FDA approved, and not only that, but available in bountiful supply, shockingly inexpensive, stunningly free of side effects, and if you took it once daily for the rest of your life, it would reduce your risk of ever getting Heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, dementia, all the slings and arrows of outrageous epidemiologic misfortune by 80%. Not only that, but you can share it with everybody you love. They can take it too. Safe enough for children and octogenarians alike. I mean, who wouldn't want that stuff? Well, we have it. Lifestyle as medicine is that. We've known this at least since 1993 when McGinnis and Faggy published Actual Causes of Death in the United States. Don't smoke, eat well, be active, 80% reduction in the rates of all major chronic disease. So where we get into debate is how many of the details do we know, this exact version or that exact version, this diet with that food or this diet without that food. Okay, there's a lot of detail we don't know. That's fine. The big picture, perfectly clear, incontrovertibly evidence-based. Diet and lifestyle are the best medicine ever discovered, period. And per my prior comment, that doesn't mean you shouldn't take other medicine if you need it, right? If you need an antibiotic, take an antibiotic. They can't do everything. But there is no other medicine where the side effect is, yes, this will treat your coronary disease, and oh, by the way, make you feel better, look better, stronger, faster, smarter, more sexually potent, everything else you might care about as side effects. You know, there are no other medicines that have those kinds of side effects.
Yes,
I think we're out of time. I see 45 seconds flashing at me. Maybe one last question?
Sure. On the subject of the diet wars and feeding the world, I just want to mention, I follow whole food plant-based, but the Weston A. Price Foundation makes a big point of there being a lot of marginal land in the world that is not suitable for growing food, but it is suitable for grazing animals. And so their position is that even though they advise eating lots of vegetables, their position is that animal food has a place for feeding a lot of people.
A population of 8 to 10 billion people. Yeah, exactly. So I referenced this. It's regenerative agriculture, where essentially you have a mixed agricultural system on those patches of land that could not be efficiently used to produce plant food. You know, I mean, let's face it, human beings are constitutionally omnivorous. We are. And, you know, there's a lot of debate about what our Stone Age ancestors ate, how much plant, how much meat. There is no debate about whether or not they were omnivorous. They were omnivorous. And we are looking at the challenges of feeding a population of 10 billion, alas, unless we do a lot more to empower women and control the population. But even 8 billion of us is a lot and is over-consuming. So making efficient use of the agricultural land is a critical element in the discussion. And that's a valid point, and it's a point not so much made by our camp, experts in nutrition focused on the optimal diet for the individual, but made from experts in sustainable agricultural systems who say that a mixed system will optimize outputs for equitable distribution to an entire population of 8 to 10 billion so everybody can get what they need. So I think it is an important point. The other critical thing is it does not in any way refute the argument that compared to where we are now, we need to eat about 90% less meat, nor does it refute any of the arguments against CAFO or the maltreatment of animals, those small farms. The animals are still, at the end of it all, being slaughtered. If you object to that ethically, you just do. And frankly, I think there's a case to be made there. But it's a totally different kind of experience. It's a much more primitive, if you will, version of agriculture, much more part of the native human experience than what's going on with factory farming. So I think it's perfectly valid to enter it into the discussion. By the way, our dialogue, our options, and our capacity to reach consensus are never helped if we decide in advance that some potentially legitimate elements of the discussion are forsworn. I think the best way to engage in dialogue is to allow for all considerations and then weigh and judge them and reach your conclusion. Thank you. Folks, thank you all. Pleasure.